and he's got this huge, it looked like an NCAA championship ring. So you don't want to try to be just too overt. So I'm looking at it.
Hi there, and welcome to The People's View. I'm Bill Ohm. I'm your host today. With me is my good friend and colleague from the state legislature last term, Steve Negron.
Hi, Bill. How are you?
Very well. Nice to have you with us again.
Nice to be here, sir.
So on the show, we like to talk about topics that deal with the legislature, politics in general. And we had an interesting development this week, Steve, with the announcement by Chris Sununu.
Yes.
I think a surprise to all of us.
Right.
And the announcement was that Chris is going to run for governor again and not run for Senate.
Right.
Now, that took me a little bit by surprise because normally somebody who's very popular in the state would want to go into D.C. Not that you would ever think about doing that.
Right.
And the matchups that I was reading about with Chris versus Jeanne Shaheen were pretty much a toss-up.
Right.
Which would bring a lot of money into the state of New Hampshire from both parties' campaigns.
Right.
Which would be good for the business of New Hampshire.
Sure.
But also make for a very interesting race because we would have a matchup between a very young and energetic fellow like Governor Sununu,
right,
versus more of a I would call a backbencher, in the Senate.
Right.
Jeanne Shaheen really hasn't introduced any legislation or taken any tough votes that I can recall.
That's true.
And we'd have a pretty good debate about that. But in thinking about that situation of why Chris would run for governor again and not for Senate, I came across some information about the current state of the Senate and how a number of the long-term senators are retiring because they feel that it's morphed into more of a large or a smaller version of the House in D.C. instead of being the Senate. And what I mean by that is the senators, in theory, are the more deliberative body. They're
Sure.
on 6-year terms. They have a chance to do what's right for the people and not worry about constant re-elections. But then there's been some rule changes that started in the previous term with Harry Reid and
Right.
continued on to this term with Mitch McConnell that have kind of diminished the power of the individual senators.
Right.
And that would be some of the cloture votes that would be stopped by senators was now not being stopped, the filibuster rules. So the thought was if you're going to be more like the House, maybe I just might want to stay in the governorship
Sure.
instead of going there.
It's interesting that, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, Bill. And that there was I still believe that the Senate still has that aura of there's only 100 of them, and every state is level playing, right? And it was intended that way, right? That's why, the House of Representatives is named such, so it's by population, but the Senate was always that place that you had legitimate debate. You had, it had so much more responsibility, not necessarily from a legislative and passing laws, because I think that body resides in the House, but you talk about judges, you talk about Supreme Court's appointees. So they had a role, I think, that was very significant, that impacted everybody. And so every state had equal share and had equal say, unlike what we see in the House.
Right. Especially the Supreme Court, which is really a key topic because that affects all 50 states. They're
Absolutely.
federal laws.
Yes.
No matter where you live, doesn't matter with population.
Right.
They apply to you.
Absolutely. One of the things I think that we've seen over the last, I'd say 2 years, certainly since this president has been in office, is that some of the people that don't necessarily agree with our philosophy of how to govern, is that the bench is not a place to legislate. Right? The bench is never intended to be a place where you go and you pander to them so that you can try to affect a change in law. it's about interpretation of the Constitution. It's about interpretation of the law that the lower bodies pass. And I think a lot of times when people lose in the House, then they try to, what we saw with the Kavanaugh hearings, people are picketing outside the Supreme Court and the Senate for the hearings. That has never been seen before. It isn't, and it's so important because that's how I believe the Democrats have wanted to be able to affect change, because they didn't have control of the House and they wanted to affect change from the bench. And that's just not who we are. That's not the way that our country was set up.
Right. I think that leads to those kind of things like the Kavanaugh hearing, where you have really an honorable man with a very important judicial record and a strong family background being just slandered
Right.
by unsupported accusations.
Right, and it's based upon, and we talked about this on my campaign. It's based upon a fear and a thought that this person isn't going to then apply the law equally across the board. So when people say he's a liberal judge, he's a conservative judge, I look at it as that, is he a constitutional judge?
Yeah.
Is that a person, he or she, that's going to look at how the law should be applied? And that's why we have 9 judges, 9 justices, right? So that there's going to be a point in time where it'll be a 5-4, it could be a 9-0. But there are people that say they want to expand the number of the Supreme Court justices, which I don't share that view. And I believe now that what we're seeing is that the Senate is a body that still needs to maintain more of an air of independence that's out there, and not be such a politicized. And I think we saw a lot of that with Harry Reid. He used it as a weapon. And I think that we need to get away, and Mitch McConnell as well. You need to get away from that, and you have to be there to do the people's work.
Yeah, I think about historically with the Senate, typically they would go to a bar association and ask for a list of qualified judges who might be promotable to the Supreme Court, and kind of go through the list. And it was kind of a gentleman's agreement that both parties would want to have well-qualified people,
Right.
and not really partisan in any kind of a strong way. But I think that fell apart when Robert Bork was nominated for the Supreme Court.
Right.
Because here's a gentleman with a very distinguished record and a very conservative person. And I think the time the issue of abortion rights were very forefront by one of the parties, and they were afraid that Robert Bork would rule against their position, and they just attacked him mercilessly,
Right.
without having a respect for the judicial background that he had.
It's funny I think those people that sit on the Senate Judiciary, you need to look at rulings. You need to look at his or her writings, for you to determine a foundation by which you can then challenge that individual based on written word, right? Not what happened when he was in high school, not what happened when he was in college, right? He wasn't an attorney back then, right? So if you want to look at the credentials of how somebody is going to act on the bench, especially if he's going to be a Supreme Court justice, is that go to those things that are pertinent, right? And I think what we saw, it was very embarrassing. Personal opinion, Bill, it was very embarrassing about how they completely disregarded Judge Kavanaugh's activity as a lawyer and as a judge, and looked at things to try to demean him as an individual, and try to parlay that as that's why he can't be a good Supreme Court justice.
Yeah.
And I think it was just it was a travesty.
Yeah, and we're starting to see some of that now with the conclusion of the Mueller report, where the Attorney General, Mr. Barr, is now being attacked for no other reason than he accurately reported what Mueller had presented.
Right.
But it wasn't the answer that the opposition party the Democrats were hoping to see.
Right. I was interviewed by a paper up north and because Congresswoman Custer was leaning towards impeachment, right, which is a political action, right?
Yes.
And I said, look, they asked me my opinion, and my opinion was they didn't get the answer they wanted, and so they're not going to let those embers go out, right? Somebody has to bring something to the table. I think it was Lenin who said, bring me any innocent man and I'll find him guilty of something. And And that is not who we are as a country. That's not who we are as a nation. We are a nation of laws. And this Mueller, who, it's funny, when they appointed him, the Democrats were like, "Oh, great, we got Mueller," and all of a sudden Mueller came out with reports. They're like, "Well, who was this guy? Why did he do what he needed to do?" So,
Yeah.
I think they didn't get the answer that they want. They still want it. You still have this, some people in Congress, that want to do some silly things. But I got to tell you, I listened to the hearings that Attorney General Barr was at. In my opinion, he was the smartest guy in the room. They want to play some games and have non-members questioning the Attorney General. Look, let's quit the circus and he's the Attorney General. He's the lead law enforcement officer of this country, and you shouldn't be politicizing it. And they're still trying to do that.
Right, and that gets to the traditions of the Senate. You and I were both in the House.
Yes.
And one of the things we experienced in our service, the first day of the House, is we decide what our rules are going to be.
Right.
And it's very much the decision of the House, not the courts, not the governor,
Excuse
but
me.
the House itself to decide what their operating rules are going to be.
Right. Absolutely. And it's you police your own.
Yes.
Right. And the Senate has their rules,
Yes.
and we have our rules. And if you're part of that body, and we all took our oath, right, that all together that same day, then we need to make sure that we are our understanding of what the oath is that we took, and we uphold that oath. And if those are the rules that we need to abide by, then that's what we should be doing.
And that's upholding the Constitution.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in our case, both the U.S. Constitution and the New Hampshire Constitution. But going back to Governor Sununu's announcement, I got to tell you, I was tickled to death. I think the governor and I have had many conversations, and he's doing such a remarkable job. And everybody's trying to chip away at him. That's you've got Chairman Buckley, and he wants to do whatever he wants, and you can't criticize success, as my father used to say. And he's doing so well, and I think he needs to be in that place, to steady the ship. Thank goodness for him in the corner office, because of all the stuff in the legislation we're seeing coming out of the House.
We got some really crappy legislation
We do.
coming across.
We do.
the
And I was talking to somebody, Bill. It's more like, let's undo all the good work that you and I did in that last session in 16 through 18 without any original thought. It's just like, if that Republican House said the sky was blue, then they're going to put in legislations that say that it was black. And it really is. You look at all the bills that are out there were just four gun bills that were just heard by the Senate. And of course, by party lines, they voted them in. So, our great backstop right now is the governor. And I know, I'm a realist. I know he can't veto everything. I mean, he still has to govern the state, and there are people that may not have voted for him, but he represents them as well. So, what he's going to have to do is do those things that I believe that are foundational to our state and who we are as an entity. And I think he's going to do those things. I support him 100%, and so when I ran, and it was unfortunate, I always told him, you'll always have my cell phone number. I'll always be there to help you, because that's my role as a congressman, would be to support my state that I represent. And if the governor needed some help, I would be there. Doesn't get that now with the current delegation that's down there.
No, not at all. I'm thinking about the impact on the legislature. If Governor Sununu had decided to run for Congress, they would have to have a new governor on an open race.
Right.
And that has a fair amount of risk, I think, for the legislature, because the only backstop we have right now is Governor Sununu.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But it could have a positive development if people recognize the good that he's doing, both to enable the legislation in the previous term and to stop the bad legislation in this term. And he stays popular with a good economy.
Right.
I'm hoping that there would be some fallout on the rest of the ticket. He'd be at the top of the ticket, but we'd like to have some additional benefit by the people who could support Governor Sununu, such as the state reps and state
Absolutely.
senators.
And I think what we're going to see is, and both at the federal level and at the state level, is we're seeing both Democratic entities doing some things that even Democrats are shaking their head and like, what is going on? Is this the party that I remember? They were very cohesive underneath Obama, and they kind of fractured a little bit. So you have the Obama for America, the OFA Democratic group, and then of course you got the Clinton kind of group, and those two always didn't mesh. And I think what we're seeing right now, both at the state level and at the federal level, that people are waking up and saying, what are they doing in both houses, right? Whether it's our house here in the state or in Congress. And I think now in a presidential year, both the governor and the president can run on economic gains. If they just run on, just look at the successes we have. Now, people are going to throw rocks. I get that. But both of them, both our president and our governor, have strong economic indicators. And so you have to ask a very basic question. Do you want to go backwards? Do you really want to be able to go and undo some of these great things that both men have been doing? And I think when you pose the question that way, somebody's going to say, yeah, I may not like them, but you know what? I look at my 401k quarterly. I like that. I like that what's going on. I look how, we have money, even though they're trying to spend money, crazily in the House and in the Senate in New Hampshire. The governors are backstop. So I think that they're going to be hard pressed to put anybody up against either one of them. At the top, because he leads the nation and our governor leads our state, to be able to bring them down. I don't think they're going to have really any kind of candidate. You got 22 people now on the Democratic side that are vying, and I think it's going to be a circus. They looked at us in 16 when we had 17 people running.
Yeah,
and
state
now
wasn't big enough. You had to have
it
a
wasn't
second
right.
debate.
Two debates, and now you're going to see, and it's scary because what I'm realizing is that how far left can everybody go? It's kind of like leapfrog, but everybody's leapfrogging to the left because they're trying to capture that base, and sometimes it gets to a point like they're going to leapfrog right into a chasm. There's really no basis for it, whether it's Booker, whether it's Kamala Harris. It doesn't matter, any one of those folks, and then they look at Joe Biden, Vice President Biden, and they're like, oh, you're too much of a moderate. So there's going to be some infighting within the Democratic Party, and I think President Trump is doing the right thing. He's going to these rallies and he's telling them, just look at the economy. I said I was going to do these things. I haven't seen it yet, but he was going to talk about immigration reform, and I have to get into that because that was a big thing in my campaign. So I think right now that we're poised to take back both houses. And put some good conservatives to both support the governor and to support the president.
That reminds me of a cartoon about the economy, which was when Bill Clinton was running for office, and he was kind of fumbling around for a theme for the second term, and there was a sign over him that said, "It's the economy, stupid." Just talk about the economy.
Just talk about the economy.
Because he had a lot of controversy in his terms.
Sure, absolutely.
But then he focused on the important item.
Right. And in 20, it's a presidential year, so we know we're going to have a lot of focus on our state, right? Being the first in the nation primary, and then of course the president's going to be the top of the ticket. We have a senatorial race, and so now the question is for us as a Republican Party, who's going to pick up the mantle to challenge Governor Shaheen or Senator Shaheen?
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting who's going to come out of the woodwork. We know that Bill O'Brien has started an exploratory committee. So Speaker O'Brien is certainly one that could put up a challenge against Senator Shaheen. But it's going to be an interesting time. I'm glad that I'm in the race, because I believe there's going to be some drag. We'll let those 600-pound gorillas, block downfield. And then we're back behind them, but we didn't have that in the midterm, and midterms
we had no
always
Senate race last time.
Right, none.
And we had no support from the party, and we got clobbered top to bottom.
Even in the city, even in our city. But I think sometimes it takes a gut punch like that for us to realize that, well, okay, what we were doing wasn't working, and we have to be honest with ourselves and say, okay, we can't drink our own bathwater. We need to fundamentally change and do some things differently, because history will repeat itself. In my race, I didn't win my hometown, and that, I'll be honest with you, that was a striking realization for me. And so we're doing some things completely different this time when it comes to Nashua, right? Because Nashua is key for anybody who wants to run in the second city. It's the largest city in the second congressional district, even by population-wise. So it's important to do well. And I think that the Dems are in for a fight. And I think all of us are going to run again. Need to realize, let's just talk about the issues, bring it to the people, whoever we're supposed to be representing, whether it's Ward 5 or Ward 8 or Ward 1 in Nashua, or the second CD, or, as a senator, whoever goes up against Senator Shaheen.
I'm thinking about the money that's going to come into the state for the Senate race. And if the race is competitive, that'd pull even more money into the race. So
Sure.
we need to have a pretty good candidate.
Absolutely. So you have for the congressional races, you have what's known as a National Republican Congressional Committee. On the Senate side, they have the National Republican Senate Committee, the NRSC. And so they're going to look at some of those places. And I think the president did some things where he focused and defended Senate seats, and we even gained some seats in the Senate. And I think now he needs to realize that all those areas that somebody could be vulnerable, the NRSC is going to be very interested to do those kind of things. The flip side to that is that, we're like all these chicks in a nest, right? And we're all with our little beaks and we're all looking to be fed, right? So whoever that bird is in the RNC is already putting people on the ground here in the state. We're the first state that they've deployed folks. So what we're seeing and what our reading of the tea leaves from the campaign is that this is an important state for the president to win. And I believe he wants to put resources to do that because it's a function of the return on investment. We're a small state, but a bellwether state,
Right.
And so investment in New Hampshire, if you do the math, is probably a better bet than an investment of same money in California or
Right.
Pennsylvania
Or Texas.
or Texas, right? So if the bottom line is you want to put conservatives in Congress to help promote the president's agenda, then you find those areas that your return on investment is better. And we believe that New Hampshire is one of those. We lost to Congresswoman Custer, but at the end of the day, and I've said this before, and we're going to bring this up, we took 42% of the vote against a 3-term incumbent that had a lot of money, and she spent a lot of money against us. So given those handicaps, and to still pull 42%, and now it's a presidential year, which some people say is good for 5 to 7 points. He's at the top of the ticket. Mm-hmm. Now we're at 49%. Now it's a fight, and so we now realize that we need to take advantage of the environment that's out there. I think with Governor Sununu being solidified in the corner office, so that and some speculation that was out there whether would he run against Senator Shaheen, because some polling numbers showed that they were very favorable, either tied or Governor Sununu was up a little bit. So everybody, it's all a chess game. Who's doing what? Are we sitting on the sidelines? Are we going to come out? Well, that's one piece that is now in place. I have announced, so that's the second CD that's in place. So now we're going to see is who's going to run in the first CD. I certainly hope Eddie Edwards runs again because he was a phenomenal candidate. And then who's going to come out of the woodwork to go up against Senator Shaheen. So a lot of moving parts right now. And as you said earlier, everything flows down. Everything, all the way down to local races and to state representative races. So we're going to be very active in Nashua, a lot to help. We're going to be very active in the executive council because I know that I believe that Joe Kenny, who didn't win last time, is going to run again, and a lot of his territory is in the second congressional. So there's ways that we can lash up and have synergy. If he's out there beating the pavement, I'm out there beating the pavement. So we're going to do some things better, and I think the party has more stability now with Steve Stepanek that's there, and Pam Tucker. So let's get all that together and let's all start rowing in the same direction because, the truth of the matter is, we were kind of sporadic and last time, and it kind of showed in the results.
Yeah. And the issue about rowing together is very important because, as conservative Republicans, we have our platform which unites us.
Yes, sir.
Free markets, free people, personal responsibility.
Right. Smaller government, less tax, and all
family
those things.
values. Yeah. And
right.
That unites us.
Right.
And I'm thinking now when I look at the Democrats, they seem to be pretty split on a lot of these areas, particularly the family values.
Yes.
When I think about Joe Biden as more of a traditional Democrat, a Tip O'Neill kind of a guy.
Yes.
Who you could shake hands and try to work something out with if you had to.
Right.
And he's up against these other folks who appear to be my way or the highway kind of politicians that don't seem to want to either listen to the other side or negotiate a strategy that might go out for some kind of a win-win for both parties.
Right.
And
it is scary, Bill, because I was making the analogy. It's kind of like a sparkler, right? So you light it, you get all these sparkles. It's neat, it's fun, and you can make this design. But sooner or later, it burns out. And what do you have? Well, you got a burnt stick. And I think it was Prime Minister Thatcher said, socialism is great until you run out of somebody else's money. And we have some people out there that, whether they believe it or not, that's their battle cry. I got to believe sometimes that some people are saying that because it's an election year, because they're stumping, because they believe that's what people are telling them that they have to say. I think I honestly believe this. If you pulled some of these people aside and just had a one-on-one conversation with them and said, do you really believe in the stuff that you're saying? I'll probably say there's probably 40 to 60% that said, well, not necessarily that way, but they have to do that. And once you're in that water, you got to stay there, right? Because it's political suicide for you to jump out to get to a more moderate position like Joe Biden. And so Joe has to now, or Vice President Biden, has to fight internally to his own party, right? Because he's not as far left as some of the folks that we're seeing. And I think that's going to run out of steam, and we've got examples after examples after examples of what's happening. Most recent one is Venezuela, what's going on with that, and I don't think there is anybody, Democrat or Republican, that wants to see that kind of environment for this country. And that's, there's no socialist success story.
No, it's there. As you pointed out, sometime sooner or later you're going to run out of other people's money, which has happened in Venezuela.
Yes, sir. Right.
And we don't want to start that path here in the U.S., especially in New Hampshire.
Right.
Especially with our own business environment right now, with the fact of cutting taxes, which the Dems are trying to reverse. Some of these family issues, which we have a difference of opinion on.
Right. Right.
The opioid crisis. So I think there's plenty of work to be done here in New Hampshire. And I'm hoping with the emphasis on the issues by the Republicans running a good campaign, we can at least convince some of the Democrats who are saying that, well, these radical ideas don't really fit that well with me, and maybe I don't want to go that way, and talk to somebody a little more reasonable like yourself, who is looking at representing the state of New Hampshire in Congress in a more moderate fashion.
Right. I'm really not a guy that likes to label people, right? Because I can, people will talk to me and just figure that I am who I am and I have my beliefs and I have my positions. I believe there are some of those people that are businessmen, that their interest is to maintain a good business, to make a decent profit, to be able to provide a good opportunity for people to work in their company, and that's politically agnostic, right? It doesn't matter where you're at. So, we believe that there's a vein that's out there that we're going to try to tap into, especially from a business side, to say, look, what we're seeing right now and what the governor's doing in this state is the right thing, and we need to keep going that way.
Right. I think it's time for a common sense candidate, and that's why I'm really pleased that you've decided to step up again, Steve, and take the mantle a second time and see if we can't get more representation of the folks of Nashua.
Absolutely.
And the folks of New Hampshire in the Congress of the United States.
Absolutely.
And with that, I'd like to thank you for joining me for our
discussion. Thank you,
Bill.
It's always a pleasure.
And I hope to see you folks again next week on The People's View.